Commander Blake Harrison felt his stomach drop as he watched the alien message play for the third time. The bridge of the research vessel Discovery was dead silent. Every crew member had stopped what they were doing to stare at the main screen. The Galactic Council representative looked like a giant praying mantis, but one that was clearly terrified. Its four arms gestured wildly as it spoke, and even through the translation software, Blake could hear the panic in its voice. Humans of Earth, you have done something incredibly dangerous. Our sensors in deep space have picked up terrible news. Your people on the planet Kepler 4-B, have made contact with the Shadow Spawn. These creatures have destroyed 17 entire civilizations in the last 1,000 years. Blake rubbed his temples. This was not the kind of first contact scenario they had trained for when humanity had finally met other intelligent life in the galaxy. They had hoped for peaceful trade and knowledge sharing. Instead, they were being told their colonists had apparently befriended the galaxy's most feared monsters. The alien continued its message, clicking and buzzing in distress. These beings are not like anything you understand. They move through solid matter like ghosts. They hunt in packs. They show no mercy to any living thing. Every species that has encountered them has either fled or been completely wiped out. On the screen, Blake could see Captain Kelly Walsh in the background of the transmission. She was the administrator of the Kepler 4-B colony, and she looked remarkably calm for someone who was supposedly surrounded by galaxy-destroying monsters. Behind her, through the windows of the prefab colonial buildings, Blake caught glimpses of something large and dark moving in the shadows. We are sending a containment fleet to your colony immediately, the alien representative announced. For the safety of every living being in the galaxy, your settlement must be isolated right now. No one can leave that planet until we figure out how to deal with this crisis. The message ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Blake stood there for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. 17 civilizations destroyed, galaxy-wide panic, and somehow, his fellow humans were living peacefully alongside these creatures. He turned to Lieutenant David Chen, his communications officer. How long before the Council fleet reaches Kepler 4-B? 6 days, sir. Maybe 7 if they stop to pick up reinforcements. Blake stared at the frozen image on the screen. Captain Walsh's face was still visible, and she looked completely unbothered by everything happening around her. There was even what might have been a slight smile on her lips. Sir, spoke up Ensign Rebecca Torres from the science station. I've been going through our databases about these shadow spawn creatures. The records are terrifying. They're described as unstoppable killing machines that can phase in and out of reality. Some reports say they're as big as trucks and have claws that can cut through starship hulls. Blake nodded grimly. And yet Captain Walsh is standing there like she's at a garden party. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. If these creatures were so dangerous, why hadn't they destroyed the human colony already? The settlement had been established 6 months ago. That was plenty of time for galaxy-destroying monsters to do their work. Sir, Chen called out, we're receiving another transmission. This one's from Captain Walsh herself. Put it through. Kelly. Walsh appeared on screen, and Blake was struck by how relaxed she looked. She was wearing a simple work jumpsuit, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Behind her, he could see other colonists going about their daily business. Commander Harrison, she began, I assume you've received the Council's rather dramatic message about our situation here. I want you to know that we're all perfectly safe, and there's no need for panic. Blake leaned forward. Captain Walsh, are you under any kind of duress? Are these creatures forcing you to say this? Kelly actually laughed. Blake, I've known you for 5 years. Do I look like I'm being held hostage? We need to talk before that Council fleet arrives. There are some things about our new neighbors that the galaxy has gotten very, very wrong. The transmission ended, leaving Blake with more questions than answers. Either Captain Walsh had lost her mind, or humanity was about to change everything the galaxy thought it knew about monsters. Dr. Robert Mitchell knelt down next to the enormous black creature, slowly reaching out his gloved hand. The thing was huge, bigger than any bear he had ever seen, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. But as his hand made contact with its side, the massive beast made a sound that reminded him of a cat purring. "Incredible," he whispered into his recording device. "Day 43 of contact with the beings the galactic community calls Shadow Spawn. The creature is responding to gentle touch with what appears to be contentment. All 6 eyes are closed. Body posture is completely relaxed." The beast had 6 glowing eyes arranged in pairs along its elongated skull, and when it opened them, they seemed to look right into his soul. But there was no malice there, no hunger or aggression, just curiosity and what Robert could only describe as friendliness. Note that when approached with open hands and slow movements, the subject shows submissive behavior. He continued speaking to his recorder. It lowers its head, exposes its neck, and even rolls onto its side. This is classic pack animal behavior, similar to what we see in Earth wolves. Captain Linda Walsh stood about 20 feet away, watching the interaction with a mixture of amazement and concern. Around the colony, she could see other humans going about their daily routines alongside. These creatures that had apparently terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years. Near the agricultural domes, her 8-year-old daughter, Amy, was playing what looked like tag with 3 smaller shadow spawn, each about the size of a large dog. The creatures moved with incredible grace, their bodies seeming to phase in and out of solid form as they dodged around the playground equipment, but they were clearly being gentle with the human child, never using their claws, never moving too fast. "Dr. Mitchell," Captain Walsh called out. "That council message made these things sound like unstoppable killing machines. Are you absolutely sure we're safe?" Robert looked up from where he was now, scratching behind what could generously be called the creature's ears. The massive beast had actually rolled over onto its back, like a dog wanting belly rubs. "Linda, think about it," he said. "Every other species in the galaxy has encountered these beings with weapons drawn, shooting first and asking questions, never. When you approach any territorial animal with aggression, what do you get back? More aggression." He gestured toward the agricultural domes where adult colonists were working side by side with the larger shadow spawn. The creatures' ability to phase through matter made them incredibly useful for reaching spaces humans couldn't access, like inside the complex machinery that kept their crops growing. "We did something different," Robert continued. "When we first landed here and saw them, instead of panicking and shooting, we observed. We watched their behavior patterns. We noticed they were bringing us food when our early crops failed. They were protecting our children from the native predators that actually were dangerous." Captain Walsh watched as one of the shadow spawn carefully lifted a heavy piece of equipment that would have required for humans to move. It placed it exactly where the human engineer had been pointing, then stepped back and waited for further instruction. "But their reputation," she said. 17 civilizations destroyed. Robert pulled out his datapad and showed it to the massive creature beside him. On the screen was a series of numbers in a mathematical sequence. The shadow spawn studied it for just a moment, then used one claw to carefully scratch the next numbers in the sequence into the dirt. "They understand mathematics, Linda. Complex mathematics. Look at this." He showed the creature a more complicated equation, and again, it provided the correct answer by drawing symbols in the ground with surprising precision. "These beings aren't mindless killing machines," Robert explained. "They're incredibly intelligent pack hunters who have been defending themselves from a galaxy full of species that shoot first and ask questions later. When we approached them with curiosity instead of weapons, with offerings of food instead of threats, they responded with friendship." Captain Walsh watched as her daughter Amy ran up to one of the smaller shadow spawn and hugged it around the neck. The creature's response was to gently nuzzle her with its massive head, being incredibly careful with its size and strength. "The real question," Robert said, standing up and brushing dirt off his knees, "is what happens when that council fleet arrives in 6 days, with weapons charged and ready to fight. These creatures have learned to trust us, but they're still territorial. If they perceive our new neighbors as a threat to the colony, to our children, we could have a real problem on our hands." The shadow spawn beside him stood up as well, staying close to Robert's side like a loyal companion. Its 6 eyes were alert, now, scanning the horizon, as if it could already sense the approaching danger. Admiral William Crawford stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Titan's Resolve, watching as his warfleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect battle formation. 12 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers arranged themselves in an attack pattern around the peaceful-looking Kepler system. Their weapons were powered up and ready, but not yet locked onto targets. Crawford was a veteran of 30 years in the Galactic Council Navy. He had seen war zones, pirate raids, and alien invasions. He knew what a planet under attack looked like, but as he stared at the blue and green world of Kepler-4 to be spinning lazily in space, everything seemed completely normal. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Jessica Foster from the sensor station, her voice tight with confusion, "I'm getting some very strange readings from the planet's surface." Crawford turned toward her, his weathered face showing concern. "Strange how, Lieutenant? I'm detecting over 300 shadow spawn life signatures scattered across the human settlement. But sir, they're not attacking. They're just living there. Mixed right in with the colonists, like they belong there." Crawford moved to look at the tactical display over her shoulder. The screen showed the colony spread across a river valley, with human heat signatures and shadow spawn energy readings scattered throughout the settlement in what looked like a completely integrated community. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Show me the colony's status readings." The data that appeared on his screen made no sense. Population was stable and growing. Food production was above normal levels. Medical emergencies were practically non-existent. Energy output was higher than expected. By every measure, the colony wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. "Open a channel to the surface," Crawford ordered. "Let's see what's really going on down there." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what looked like a colony administration building. Captain Helen Walsh appeared on screen, looking completely relaxed as she sat behind her desk. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the simple blue jumpsuit of a colonial administrator. But what made Crawford's blood run cold was what he could see behind her. Through the large window, one of the massive shadow spawn was lying in the afternoon sunlight, grooming itself like an enormous cat. Its black fur gleamed as it casually licked one of its massive paws. "Admiral Crawford," Captain Walsh said with a warm smile. "Welcome to Kepler-4 for 2B. I assume you're here because of all the panic about our neighbors." Crawford opened his mouth to respond, to demand an explanation for what he was seeing, but before he could speak, chaos erupted on his bridge. "Contact," shouted his weapons officer, Lieutenant Mark Torres. Multiple incoming signatures rising from the planet's surface. Crawford spun around to see his tactical display lighting up with dozens of moving dots. The shadow spawn were launching themselves from the colony world, their bodies phasing in and out of solid matter as they streaked toward his fleet. "They're moving to intercept us, sir," Torres called out. "Estimated arrival in 30 seconds. Through the view screen, Crawford could see Captain Walsh's expression change from calm to alarmed. "Admiral, please don't fire. They're just trying to protect the colony. They think you're here to attack us." But it was too late. The shadow spawn were moving with incredible speed, their natural ability to shift between dimensions, making them appear and disappear on sensors like ghosts. To Crawford's automated defense systems, they looked like incoming missiles. "Sir, they're jamming our communications," reported the communications officer. "I can't reach the surface." Crawford watched in horror as dozens of the creatures swarmed around his ships, phasing through the whole armor like it didn't exist. His weapon systems couldn't get a lock on targets that kept shifting between solid and energy states. "Defensive positions," he ordered. "All ships, engage emergency protocols." The Council fleet's automatic defense systems activated, filling space with energy blasts and missile fire. But the shadow spawn were like nothing they had ever fought. They moved through the attacks like shadows, appearing inside shield barriers, striking at critical systems, then disappearing before return fire could reach them. The battle lasted only minutes, but the damage was devastating. 3 of Crawford's destroyers were disabled, their engines torn apart by claws that could apparently cut through reinforced starship hulls. On the shadow spawn side, several of the creatures floated motionless in space, their bodies flickering weakly between dimensions. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Crawford shouted, but the damage was already done. On the surface of Kepler 44-B, he could see through the still-active view screen that Captain Walsh was shouting orders to her colonists. Human and shadow spawn alike were rushing toward what looked like medical facilities, working together to help the injured from both sides. Crawford slumped in his command chair, staring at the tactical display showing the aftermath of the brief battle. He had come here to save humanity from monsters, but all he had accomplished was proving that sometimes the real monsters were the ones who shot first and asked questions later. The creatures weren't attacking the human colony, they were protecting it. And he had just declared war on humanity's first alien allies. Dr. Catherine Parker stepped out of the transport beam and immediately felt her heart racing. The main dome of the human colony stretched out before her, filled with the soft hum of daily life. But what made her hands shake was the fact that shadow spawn were everywhere, moving through the settlement like they owned the place. As the Council's chief xenobiologist, she had studied every known species in the galaxy. She had read every terrifying report about these creatures. According to official records, she should be dead within minutes of setting foot on this planet. 4 Council security officers flanked her, their weapons drawn but not aimed. The ceasefire agreement was only 3 hours old, and nobody trusted it to last. In every shadow, in every corner, she could see the glowing eyes of shadow spawn, watching her every move. Their 6 eyes seemed to burn with protective intensity, like guard dogs ready to strike if she made one wrong move. "Dr. Parker," came a calm voice from across the dome. Dr. Alan Mitchell approached her slowly, his hands held out where everyone could see them. "Welcome to Kepler 44-B. I know this must be overwhelming, but please, try to stay calm. They can sense fear, and right now, they're very protective of the colonists." Catherine's voice came out as barely a whisper. "How are you still alive?" Alan smiled and gestured toward a massive shadow spawn that was lying near a group of human children. The creature was easily 8 feet long and covered in midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light. But, as Catherine watched in disbelief, one of the children was using the beast as a pillow while reading a book. "Try to think of them as very large, very intelligent dogs," Alan suggested. "I know that sounds crazy, but just watch their behavior." As if on cue, a 10-year-old boy named Danny came running through the dome, laughing as one of the smaller shadow spawn chased after him. The creature was moving in a playful bouncing motion, keeping its razor-sharp claws carefully retracted. When it finally caught up to the boy, it gently nudged him with its massive head, then took off running in the other direction, clearly wanting Danny to chase it back. Catherine felt her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This goes against everything we know about these creatures. They're supposed to be unstoppable killers. Captain Ruth Walsh joined the group, wiping grease off her hands with a work rag. She had been helping repair equipment damaged in the brief battle with Admiral Crawford's fleet. "Dr. Parker, let me ask you something," Captain Walsh said. What happens when you approach a wild animal with weapons drawn, making loud noises and aggressive movements? The animal becomes defensive and may attack, Catherine answered automatically. Exactly. Now, what happens when you approach the same animal slowly, with food, speaking softly and showing no signs of threat? Catherine was beginning to understand. The animal may become curious or even friendly. That's exactly what happened here, Captain Walsh explained. When we first landed 6 months ago, our sensors detected these creatures all around our landing site. Every protocol said we should establish a defensive perimeter and prepare for attack. But our xenobiologists convinced us to try something different. Alan picked up the story. Instead of setting up weapons, we set up observation posts. We watched their behavior patterns. We noticed they were curious about us, not hostile. When our early food shipments were delayed and our crops were failing, we started finding fresh fruit and edible plants placed near our buildings every morning. Catherine followed them toward a worksite where humans and shadow spawn were collaborating to repair an atmospheric processor damaged in the recent battle. She watched in amazement as one of the creatures phased through the solid metal casing to reach components that would have been impossible for humans to access. Their natural phase-shifting ability makes them incredibly valuable partners, Alan explained. They can perform repairs that would take us hours in just minutes, and in return, we share our food, our shelter, and our friendship. One of the shadow spawn noticed Catherine watching and approached slowly. She instinctively stepped back, but Alan held up a hand. Easy, Dr. Parker. Let it come to you. Don't make any sudden movements. The massive creature stopped a few feet away and lowered its head in what was clearly a submissive gesture. Its 6 eyes studied her with obvious intelligence, and Catherine could almost see it thinking, trying to decide if she was friend or foe. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand toward the creature. After a moment's hesitation, the shadow spawn stepped forward and gently touched her palm with its nose. The contact sent a shiver through Catherine's body, not from fear, but from the realization that she was touching a being that had been misunderstood by the entire galaxy. They're not monsters, she whispered, her scientific mind finally accepting what her eyes were showing her. They're partners. Around the dome, she could see dozens of similar interactions. Humans and shadow spawn working together, playing together, living together in harmony. The galaxy's most feared predators had become humanity's closest allies, not through conquest or trickery, but through simple understanding and respect. For the first time in her career, Dr. Catherine Parker realized that everything the Council thought they knew about these creatures was completely wrong. Admiral William Crawford stood in the central plaza of the Kepler-442b colony, but this time he wasn't wearing battle armor or carrying weapons. Instead, he wore the simple diplomatic uniform of a Council peace envoy, watching something that 6 months ago would have given him nightmares. His 12-year-old daughter, Lisa, was playing fetch with a young shadow spawn in the afternoon sunlight. The creature, about the size of a large horse, bounded across the grass with pure joy as it chased after a bright red ball. When it brought the ball back to Lisa, it dropped it gently at her feet and sat back on its haunches, tail wagging like an enormous dog. Again, midnight. Bring it back again. Lisa laughed, throwing the ball as far as her small arms could manage. Crawford shook his head in amazement. The same species that had been described in Council reports as unstoppable killing machines was now playing fetch with his daughter. The creature he was watching had 6 glowing eyes, claws that could cut through starship hulls, and the ability to phase through solid matter. But right now, all it cared about was making a human child happy. Hard to believe, isn't it? Captain Helen Walsh said, walking up beside him. She was carrying a datapad filled with reports that would change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about dangerous species. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this is all a dream, Crawford admitted. 6 months ago, I came here ready to evacuate your colony from monsters. Now those same monsters just helped evacuate 3 council worlds from natural disasters. It was true. When volcanic eruptions had threatened the mining colonies on Proxima 7, the Shadow Spawn had used their phase-shifting abilities to rescue trapped miners from collapsed tunnels. When floods had hit the agricultural world of New Geneva, they had carried supplies to stranded families faster than any council rescue ship could have managed. But it's not just the rescue work, Captain Walsh continued, showing him her data pad. Dr. Mitchell has been studying their understanding of dimensional physics. These beings naturally exist in multiple dimensions at once. The technology they've shared with us could revolutionize space travel. Crawford watched as Dr. Brian Mitchell approached them, accompanied by one of the largest shadow spawn in the colony. The massive creature walked beside the scientist like a loyal companion, its multiple eyes constantly scanning the area for any potential threats to its human friends. "Admiral," Dr. Mitchell greeted him warmly. "I wanted to thank you again for convincing the Council to establish the cultural exchange program. Having young people from different species come here to learn about interspecies cooperation has been incredible." The cultural exchange program had been Crawford's idea after witnessing the bond between humans and shadow spawn. Now, young beings from dozens of council species came to Kepler-4 for 2B to learn how to communicate with creatures they had been taught to fear. "The remarkable thing," Dr. Mitchell continued, "is that humans have been dealing with misunderstood predators for thousands of years on Earth. Wolves, bears, big cats. We learned long ago that the difference between a dangerous animal and a loyal companion often comes down to how you approach them." The shadow spawn beside him, whom the colonists had nicknamed Guardian, made a low rumbling sound that Crawford had learned was their equivalent of laughter. The massive creature had become something of a celebrity in the colony, known for its gentle nature with children and its incredible intelligence. "You know what the best part is?" Captain Walsh said, scrolling through her datapad. "The Council's Xenobiological Department has now identified 17 other so-called monster species that might just be misunderstood neighbors, waiting for someone to approach them with friendship instead of weapons." Crawford nodded thoughtfully. Already, human diplomatic teams were being sent to make contact with species that had been written off as too dangerous to communicate with. The deathworms of Sigma Prime turned out to be incredibly advanced engineers who built underground cities. The Voidstalkers near the Galactic Rim were actually nomadic traders who had been defending their shipping routes from pirates. A burst of laughter drew his attention back to his daughter. Lisa had convinced 3 more shadow spawn to join the game, and now they were all taking turns fetching the ball while she cheered them on. The creatures were being incredibly gentle, each one carefully controlling their massive size and strength to avoid accidentally hurting the small human. "You know what I think," Crawford said, watching his daughter hug one of the creatures around its massive neck. "I think humans have a gift for seeing the good in beings that others are afraid of. We don't just see claws and fangs and scary appearances. We see the potential for friendship." The shadow spawn that Lisa was hugging, whom she had named Buddy, gently nuzzled her with its enormous head, being incredibly careful with its size. Its 6 eyes glowed softly, with what could only be described as affection. "That's exactly right," Dr. Mitchell agreed. While other species saw monsters in the darkness, humans saw friends who just needed someone to throw them a ball and tell them they were good boys. As the sun set over the Kepler colony, Crawford watched humans and shadow spawn working together, playing together, and living together in perfect harmony. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for a millennium had become humanity's first true alien allies, not through force or complex negotiations, but through the simple recognition that sometimes the scariest-looking beings just need someone to show them kindness. Crawford smiled as his daughter ran toward him, followed by her new shadow spawn friends. Humanity was quickly becoming known throughout the galaxy as the species that could make friends with anyone, even the monsters that lived in the dark.